Hi, I'm Captain America, here to talk to you about one of the most valuable traits a soldier or student can have. Patience. Sometimes patience is the key to victory. Sometimes it leads to very little, and it seems like it's not worth it. And you wonder why you waited so long for something so disappointing.
You know that really cheesy movie or TV show you saw in the 90s when you were young and impressionable and thought it was the coolest thing ever, but then decades later you look back on it with an adult mind and realize how stupid everything about it was? That's Mass Effect 3. I mean it. I didn't even show you half of the nonsensical bullshit that this game had. The story is rushed in so many areas, with more plot holes and continuity errors than you can shake a singularity at. A lot of the dialogue is so cringe-inducing, with so many unbearable and convoluted lines that just go beyond the realm of ridiculous. So many of the characters are wasted, underutilized, stupid, mishandled, contradictory, with motivations that make zero sense and artificially characterized to serve this nuclear wasteland of a plot. The world building is completely backwards, committing so many atrocious retcons that make the world of Mass Effect less interesting. The villains are complete and utter morons, who diminish their intimidation factors on backwards logic and self-destructive goals. And in spite of the developers constantly telling us that we have the ability to make all sorts of different choices, the path of the narrative is painfully linear. The abundance of dialogue options we had in previous games are completely stripped away, with the wheel being thoroughly neutered. And what really bothers me about the abandoned squad mates we cared about getting sidelined is that they could have easily fit the slots of the new squad mates that no one even bothers to remember. Zaid, Kasumi, Jax, Samara, even Jacob had more personality and established character than James Vega. And even then, most of your squad mates are just recycled from Mass Effect 1, with less diversity and options available to you than Mass Effect 1 and 2. The story has a lot of interesting scenarios, but many of them are cheapened, rushed, badly written, or completely abandoned. And I feel like what hurts most about this whole thing is that it didn't have to be this way. There was no reason that BioWare couldn't put out a better story than what they went with here. It's like a completely different team of writers with no knowledge of the first two games took over, and instead of thinking about how to put the narrative together in a way that made sense, they just threw whatever random bunker stuff came to their heads at the wall to see what would stick. Even the ending ends up being meaningless in the grand scheme of things, if that even makes sense. The game has 3 different endings where you choose what Shepard's final decision is, with an additional choice provided by the extended cut. But since the trailer for Mass Effect 4 confirmed the Destroy ending to be canon, it's going to make your playthrough even more obsolete if you chose one of the other endings. Maybe it was the hype at the time, but I have no idea why it took me this long to realize what a legendarily awful piece of trash this story is. And it's really, really sad. Because in spite of everything I've said throughout this video, I still have a soft spot for this game. I get why people like it. I really, really do. It's not like there was absolutely no good writing that was put into it. There were actually moments in the game that kept me interested and made me care about these situations. There were times that the characters were well written, or you had an interesting down-to-earth conversation with them. There were times where the dramatic moments were effective or strong enough to make a certain scene interesting. There were side missions that were actually fun to play through with worthwhile dialogue and character interaction. I don't want to say Mass Effect 3 did nothing right, because that's clearly not true. There were moments of good writing and character development that was possible to make out through the cracks. In the beginning of the video when I said Mass Effect 3 had some of the best moments out of any of the 3 games, I really mean it. Things like Javik's character arc, Jack rising above her abuse and trauma and seeing her become a better person, Morden's sacrifice, Grunt's heroic stand against the corrupted Rachni, those conversations you had with Thane on the Citadel before his fight with Kai Lang, that final conversation with his son before passing away, your conversations with Ernat Bakara, that bro moment with Rex passing down stories about Shepard meaning hero, all those one-on-one chats with Liara, Garrus, and Tali, the fun banter between squad mates on the Normandy, all those nods and references to side quests and side characters from the first 2 games, that final conversation with Anderson, this is all proof that Mass Effect 3 could have been one of the greatest third entries in a video game trilogy ever made if they just put more time into thinking this story through. But with all the crazy just shit flying around in this completely broken narrative, it's impossible to ignore the smell. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the most disappointing thing about Mass Effect 3 isn't the story, the characters, or even the ending. The most disappointing thing about Mass Effect 3 is its unrealized potential to be a masterpiece. I really want to believe that if EA just didn't force BioWare to complete the game on a strict deadline and if it was given that extra year of development, then the story could have been a lot more satisfying. But in all these interviews I've seen, BioWare just seems way too prideful of the final product, in a way that they think the rushed end result that they put out was acceptable. A lot of the conflicts are not properly set up or explained very well, and the numerous ways that the script was cut during production just makes the overall product feel less complete. The presentation of events and the order in which they happen is really sloppy, and the tone is constantly shifting in all sorts of terrible directions. Several of the themes are unengaging with how they're handled by the writers, and many of the characters are so inconsistent that they feel like completely different characters. It's not like the people who worked on Mass Effect 3 are incapable of telling a good story. We saw in Mass Effect 1 and even 2 that they can put out some engaging and compelling writing, which makes you wonder even more what was going on in their heads when they came up with all these ridiculous ideas. These were incredibly easy to avoid mistakes that I cannot believe they actually made. It's so embarrassing that this game doesn't even feel like it's from the same franchise as the first two. We already had good storytelling in Mass Effect 1 and 2, so let's make Mass Effect 3 a mindless action game. That is the logic that this game operates on. It's far from one of the worst experiences I've ever had. Believe me, I've seen far worse. But I just can't think of another game that brought more widespread disappointment to its fanbase than this one. It dropped the ball so badly that it made me feel indifferent towards the future of the franchise. I know there's Mass Effect 4 coming up, and it looks like it's going to try and give us actual closure for the story of Commander Shepard, but given BioWare's reputation in recent years, let alone their current status, I have very little hope that this will give us the closure we're looking for. It's honestly really sad that this ended up happening to Mass Effect. 10 years ago, it was at the top of the world, one of the most celebrated video game franchises ever made. Now it's just another third-person shooter. It didn't even have to be the best entry in the series, just a satisfying one. But Mass Effect 3, as it is simply not a satisfying conclusion, and this trilogy deserved a lot better. Its rich world, compelling characters, interesting history, groundbreaking role-playing mechanics, it feels like it was leading up to something so much bigger. But it feels like it just amounted to nothing in the end. And that's disrespectful for all the time we put into this trilogy. And it's also disrespectful for a franchise that could have been so much more.